celebratory press conferences over there as well.
Oh, God, imagine that.
In the US. It's crazy.
I wanted to ask you about that point you've just referred to, Sue, because I know the Heart Foundation, I don't know if it still does, but in its lottery, it used to ask you to make your name known for publicity purposes if you won. So when push comes to shove with all of these raffles and lotteries, they can't make you do that, you're saying?
Well, they can if it's in the terms and conditions. If it says, as part of the terms which they've got to let you know about, that you will make yourself available for publicity, or they can use your image or use your name for publicity, then that's what you've agreed to, and they can do it.
Okay, so that's the nitty-gritty. So if you buy a ticket anyway, because you don't really think you're going to win, but you do win, and you think, oh, goodness, I do not want everybody to know, you are in an invidious position at that point.
Yeah, you are. If you have gone into the sort of newspaper competition to win a car, and you will have agreed, most likely, that your name will be made public, then probably to pick up the car you will have to do that. I'm not sure that they would invoke it here, but certainly it's likely to be in the terms and conditions that that's what you've agreed to, because they want publicity for these things. It helps them,
yeah.
and the Heart Foundation, I think, that competition was run by a private company. So, any of the terms and conditions wouldn't have been with the Heart Foundation, they would have been with a company, basically, that owned the competition.
The argument in favour, Sue, of publicity is that it keeps it all above board. It's a safeguard against a rigged process. You know who's won. But that argument doesn't seem to apply to whatever processes, for example, the banks here use to determine winners of their prize draws. And bonus bonds is an example. You don't know who's won bonus bonds, but you have faith in the draw. What do you think of the argument about making it public to keep it honest?
Well, look, I think in the old days they probably did publish bonus bonds winners by either the number or the person's name, but they would have been an incredibly long list somewhere that nobody really ever bothered to look at. And similarly, probably with the banks, that might be by some sort of other way, but that they would be public who had actually won these things. And those prizes are probably a lot smaller, so somebody's not going to, be hitting you up for money. But it's the big ones, the big lottos, the millions of dollars. I guess that's where there's more concern.
It is interesting too, because America as a nation is way more corrupt than New Zealand is too, generally. I find the fact that you can elect all these different officials that we have as appointed, that opens the door to lobbying and much more corruption, and yet this is something that happens there. I don't know.
Or as President Trump would say, it gets things done.
Yeah, that's right.
But Sue, before you go, how do you know if you have, a save and win account or whatever? I mean, whoever's running what, how do you know that the draws are what they say they are and the money they say is being dished out is in fact dished out? People must wonder this, and I wonder if there are any kind of checks and balances as far as that goes.
Well, I suppose it would also be in the terms and conditions of those competitions as well. So if you have a look at them and you want to find out who has won something, you can probably ask the organiser.
Okay, so you probably have to make them demonstrate to you that in fact it's all hunky-dory.
Yeah, and in some of those terms and conditions it may well be that, the draw is made by a JP or a policeman or, something like that, so that it is a sort of an authorised person that's doing the draw.
All right, thank you very much for clarifying all that for us, Sue. That's Sue Chetwin on the panel. Vis-a-vis what we were talking about with the Fast and the Furious, actor Michael Hurst has texted us.
Uh-huh.
And he said, I was listening to the discussion about how movies get to us, and I suddenly remembered how in 1982, I think, I'd been to the gym and then went to see Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was really affected by this film and immediately went back to the gym when it was over. I then worked out for the second time that day, so hard that I was actually sick, and thankfully, I have never seen a Fast and Furious film.
But he has become a shining example of manhood in the New Zealand theatre and film scene.
Well, he's certainly always in shape, isn't he?
Yes.
Lasting influence. Patrick Morgan, thank you for being on the panel today.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Penny.
And back at you.
Always nice to talk to both of you. Penny, nice to see you again.
Ka kite.
Thank you, everybody. We're back tomorrow, and Checkpoint coming up very soon with John Campbell.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The AIDS Foundation says a funding decision announced today is a game changer that could halve or drive down the rate of HIV infection. Pharmac says it will broaden access to the drug Truvada for up to 4,000 people. A health correspondent, Karen Brown, reports.
Truvada, which is used in a pre-exposure prophylaxis treatment, is already funded for treating people infected with HIV. From next month, however, it'll also be funded for those not infected but at high risk of contracting HIV. The AIDS Foundation says many gay men who are most affected currently pay up to $100 a month for generic forms of Truvada. The Labour Party promised last July to fund it if elected. Pharmac rejects the view it's been pressured into funding the drug, saying it's been working with the foundation since last August when Truvada was registered for use in New Zealand. Ko Karen Brown tēnei.
Rescuers are combing through the rubble of collapsed buildings in and around the Taiwanese city of Hualien, seeking survivors of this morning's 6.4 earthquake. At least 2 people died and more than 200 were injured. Officials say all survivors have now been freed from a 10-storey hotel that partly collapsed in the quake and was left tilted at a dramatic angle. Other buildings have also been left leaning while emergency workers search for people who might be trapped inside. The BBC's Cindy Sue reports.
The authorities are saying that they're not getting any more reports of missing people or people unaccounted for. So they are reassured by that, but they're not taking any chances. They're combing through all the buildings that are affected with sniffer dogs and life detection equipment to make sure that there's nobody else still inside.
Cindy Sue reporting. A man reported to be a New Zealander has been removed from a flight while trying to leave Australia and charged with rape. The Queensland Police say on Monday a 37-year-old woman told them she'd been raped by the 47-year-old at a house in the Gold Coast suburb of Majiraba. A few hours later, they received reports the man had boarded an aircraft at Gold Coast Airport bound for New Zealand. He's due to appear in court today on a single charge of rape. The union representing sawmill workers in Gisborne is welcoming news that up to 60 jobs could be created in the region. Far East Sawmills has bought the former Prime Mill at Matawhero, guaranteeing the creation of 50 to 60 jobs by April. The company that owns another Gisborne mill, JNL, last month announced plans to cut its workforce of 205 to 97. The president of First Union, Robert Reid, says it will come as some relief for JNL workers that another mill is opening. The union wants JNL to put its plan on hold in case a way can be found to keep the mill open without resorting to redundancies. A truck shop has been fined a total of $114,000 for misleading customers. Aperture Marketing went door-to-door throughout the North Island between June 2015 and April 2016, selling electronic goods on credit at inflated prices. It was convicted of 24 charges in the Auckland District Court, including not providing customers with information about balances, payments and application fees. In some cases, the goods were repossessed and resold, but Aperture kept charging customers interest on them. In sentencing, Judge Mary Beth Sharp said it was unlikely the fines would be paid, but the sentence will make others in the industry think twice before offending. Tip Top says it made a mistake advertising 2 types of ice cream as having been made in New Zealand. It's emerged the Duo ice cream sandwich and the Popsicle watermelon wedgie are both made in Spain. Sarah Robson has more.
Some Tip Top customers assumed that as a New Zealand brand using New Zealand dairy products, Tip Top would make all its ice creams here. The company says it thought it had been transparent by stating on the packaging that the products were made in Spain. But parent company Fonterra says it was an error to advertise them on the Tip Top website as New Zealand made using local ingredients. That has since been corrected. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The former Labour Party Cabinet Minister and Deputy Leader Annette King is expected to take up the position of Australian High Commissioner later this year. Chris Seed, who's been in the job since November 2013, is due to return to New Zealand by the end of the year. RNZ News understands Dame Annette, who has family in Sydney, will then take up the Canberra position. She left Parliament last year after 33 years as an MP and was made a Dame in this year's New Year honours. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, and the Hurricanes winger Julian Savea is banking on this weekend's Brisbane Tens tournament, kick-starting his rugby season and ultimately leading a return to the All Blacks. A form slump saw Savea fall out of favour with All Blacks and the Hurricanes last year. He sits second on the All Blacks all-time try scoring list, having scored 46 tries, just 3 behind Doug Howlett. He played only 2 tests in 2017, and Savea says he intends putting greater emphasis on fun this year, determined to regain a regular starting spot in the All Blacks.
And that's the end goal, and whatever happens from there happens. But yellow jersey for me at the moment is the main focus, and playing well for them.
Julian Savea. Leading singles player Erin Routliffe will miss New Zealand's opening Fed Cup tennis match against Lebanon and Bahrain tonight. Fresh from a win in a second-tier futures tournament in Egypt, Routliffe has suffered a groin injury in training. New Zealand are already without top-ranked Marina Irakovic, who has an ongoing back problems and whose world ranking has slipped to 223. More than 10 years after his final game with the team, Barry Bonds will have his number 25 jersey retired by the San Francisco Giants Baseball Club. Bonds finished his career with a Major League Baseball record of 762 home runs, but connections to steroids have kept him out of the Hall of Fame. That's the news.
This is unacceptable. I did not sign up for this. When I prayed during the winter months, I asked the Lord to make it warm. I did not say, Lord, please bring the devil from hell and have him sit his ass crack on earth. That's not what I asked for.
Nights with Brian Crump. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Coromandel Peninsula, isolated showers clearing this afternoon, and they're mainly fine. Rain developing in the east tomorrow morning, spreading elsewhere by evening. Auckland and Bay of Plenty, showers clearing this afternoon and becoming mostly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo, Taranaki and Taihepe, cloudy periods and isolated showers today, fine tomorrow with increasing high cloud. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, mostly cloudy, patchy rain for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Whanganui to Wellington, fine with a few cloudy periods. Nelson, Buller, Westland, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, mostly fine, however isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. For Yortland and Southland, a few light showers clearing this afternoon, then fine, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a chance of a light shower. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Toti mai rai, hoa mai, he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint for Wednesday, February the 7th. Tonight, Wall Street's record fall on Monday is not matched by a fall here, but volatility may increasingly be common with conflicting signals coming from the US. The earthquake in Taiwan, emergency personnel believe all survivors have now been freed from the 10-storey hotel. Complaints against a Housing New Zealand complex in Christchurch. The local MP tells us it may just be the tenants in one unit who are up to no good. And Australia does a Crocodile Dundee tourism campaign ad in the Super Bowl. It wasn't cheap, but it's already paying off, and that may be for New Zealand too. All of that ahead on Checkpoint. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight on Wall Street and New Zealand's response to Monday's record fall in points terms, of course, not percentage terms. It may have been, were yesterday not Waitangi Day and therefore a public holiday, that the New Zealand market would have tumbled in a similarly dramatic fashion. But by the time the local market got to respond to Monday, Tuesday's bounce on Wall Street had softened the blow well and truly, to such an extent that while the market plunged 2% after opening, it then spent the day recovering much of that ground. The New Zealand share market closed about 9 minutes and 20 seconds ago. At 5 o'clock, the top 50 index ended down just 47 points, or 0.6% at 8,195, a much smaller fall than had initially been feared. Australia, which was open yesterday and did fall sharply, is also recovering much of what was lost. It's still early in Asia, but Japan opened sharply up, recovering much of Tuesday's fall too. What does this all mean? Well, it may signal a period of volatility with conflicting data coming out of the US, and global markets obviously prepared to follow Wall Street up and down. In short, while today wasn't a crash as much as a speed bump, what next? When the market closed, the bell ringers at the New York Stock Exchange grinned and clapped like people who'd unexpectedly survived a disaster. The Dow Jones up 567 points. Their tone was triumphant, but market commentators...
Keep your seatbelts fastened, is what I say.
That's CNN's Richard Quest, of course, who, having seen the biggest one-day point fall in the history of the Dow Jones on Monday, was qualified in his response to the bounce.
Because having seen the market go down so sharply on Friday and Monday, there was something of a recovery today with a 2% gain, 2.3% gain in the Dow. Let us not make too much of this. We would be fools and naive and be silly to believe that this correction or this process is over just because there was one good day. Instead, you have to look at what happened during the day. The wide shifts and the huge volatility that allowed the Dow to go through the best part of 1,200 points. That is going to continue for the next foreseeable future.
What has been unusual about the last 14 or 15 months, probably since the Trump election, is the lack of volatility.
That's Brad Gordon from Hobson Wealth Partners, formerly Macquarie Private Wealth New Zealand, in their dealing room in downtown Auckland. Philosophically,
markets climb the stairs, go down the escalator. This is one hell of an escalator, and I guess gives fright, but on the back of some very, very strong performance over recent years.
Our cameraman and I went to visit Brad and his colleagues this morning and found their dealers so calmly watching the New Zealand market trading. It was immediately apparent that whatever losses were unfolding in New Zealand were only denting the long and profitable climb that has preceded them.
The NZX 50 for the 12 months to 31 December were up about 22%, so off its highs we're about 4%. So
we'll come back to the so, but this is a correction many people saw as inevitable, even necessary, and according to Richard Quest, it won't be the end of the roller coaster ride.
Eventually, a bottom will be found and the market will consolidate around a certain level before it can start to build again. So a good day for the moment, but there's plenty more volatility.
I just want to state that, as you probably have noticed, the stock market hit an all-time record high today, over 22,000.
In part, the fact that markets don't defy gravity forever has been subsumed beneath a political narrative.
It's going to go higher, too.
With Donald Trump repeatedly attaching himself to its ascent.
Today, the stock market hit the highest level that it has ever been.
The only way was up, except there hasn't been a share market in history that only goes one way. And what, in part, was fueling Wall Street was an absence of returns elsewhere. Bond rates not worth writing a cheque for.
US 10-year treasuries have been very, very low. 18 odd months ago, they were down at 1.5%.
Yes, you heard correctly, bond returns of 1.5%. No wonder so much money went in search of a tailwind elsewhere. But bond rates have been rising. We're back with Brad Gordon and his very calm colleagues in the dealing room in downtown Auckland. So bonds were 1.5%.
So far this year, they've moved from 2.4%, this is the US 10-year Treasury rate, 2.4%, and then spiked quite quickly to 2.87%. And all of a sudden, at 2.87%, that tailwind for equities has just been pulled. People can look at almost 3% on what is 10-year money, but in the US, after earning 1%, that's starting to look a bit more attractive. They all of a sudden, it's become a little bit of a rebalancing to say, well, actually, we can probably take some risk off the table and buy and lock in some of those gains by buying some money at 3%. And so that sparked the initial sell-off. Then I think we get a whole lot of technical signals coming to the market, and there's a lot of tools that are placed, particularly in the US, we call them black boxes, computer signals that when markets hit certain levels, they'll either buy or sell.
Wait a sec, so there are pre-programmed levels at which selling just automatically goes in?
Yes, we understand that, and so you saw yesterday, if you look at a chart, when the market, Dow Jones Industrial Average hit 25,000, we saw a small technical bounce. When that technical bounce didn't hold. There was a very strong sell signal that hit the market, and I don't think the buying depth was there to cope with it.
So that wasn't clients phoning in and saying sell, sell, sell. That was preloaded at 25,000.
That, as far as I understand, that's computer-driven selling.
So bonds rising, the market reaching a level at which sell orders were programmed in, and at which profit-taking could and should have been expected. A new Federal Reserve chairman accompanying concerns inflationary pressures will fuel further interest rate rises, and suddenly, bang, gravity. Where to next? Who knows? The inflationary pressures driving interest rates up in the US are, in part, a response to 10 million new jobs in the country over the past 4 years. And that's good news.
What's driven this is actually strong economic data. Strong economic data that sent interest rates and inflation expectations slightly higher.
Optimists, and there are plenty of them, point out that's a sign of strength. But the US is borrowing and borrowing, and the country's deficit is a heavy weight. What's all this mean? Well, on Monday, PBS quoted John Kenneth Galbraith. There are two kinds of economists, those who don't know the future and those who don't know they don't know. Donald Trump, though, is riding the bull. This from the State of the Union speech as recently as last week.
The stock market has smashed one record after another, gaining $8 trillion and more in value in just this short period of time. The great news for Americans, 401k, retirement pension, and college savings accounts.
Just days later, a record fall and then a bounce. Let's end with Richard Quest and his useful, if not technical, advice.
Keep your seatbelts fastened, is what I say.
The inimitable Richard Quest from CNN. Of course, Giles Beckford, our business editor, is going to join us after 5:30. We're going to keep an eye on what's happening in Australia and throughout Asia, but the bounce looks well and truly established in most of those markets. Giles will join us in about 20 minutes. Emergency workers in Taiwan have worked through the night to free those trapped in buildings after this morning's powerful 6.4 magnitude quake amid waves of strong aftershocks, some of them very strong. The port city of Hualien, which is home to about 100,000 people, was the hardest hit. A 10-storey hotel in the city partially collapsed, leaving it really dramatically tilted on its side. Emergency officials say after a long operation, everyone on the upper floors has been rescued, but 2 people have been confirmed dead and up to 200 injured. With more, here's the BBC's Laura Westbrook.
Responders rush to the scene as the destruction becomes clear. A woman screams as she jumps from a building, and people rush to help her. It may have been a 6.4 quake here in Hualien, but it was very shallow and violent. One eyewitness described the moment the quake struck.
We were all in bed and everything just started shaking. The bed started shaking, everyone kind of started screaming.
Like many others, she fled onto the street. But while she was being interviewed, this happened.
Oh my God, this is an aftershock, I'm sorry.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
My goodness.
So we're told to just go to the road and stay in the road, but yeah, we're having a few aftershocks. This is maybe our 7th of the hour. After the initial shock, they came maybe every about, I would say, 5 minutes, and now they've been happening maybe every 20. They've not been as recent, but yeah, they're still happening. That was the biggest one we felt so far in terms of the aftershock.
The bottom 2 floors of the Marshall Hotel have completely gone. It leans dangerously on its side. More than 100 people were trapped inside buildings. Responders used cranes to help free people from the top stories. Those on lower floors were able to climb to safety on their own. Hundreds have been taken to hospital. Many people who fled are on the streets and in parks, huddled under blankets, looking dazed and afraid. Making things worse, aftershocks have been hitting throughout the night. Taiwan lies near the junction of 2 tectonic plates and is regularly hit by earthquakes. But residents here say this is the biggest one they've experienced in a decade.
19 and a half past 5. That's Laura Westbrook. We will keep an eye on the aftershocks up in Taiwan. There are quite a few of them still happening. We head now to Christchurch, where a Housing New Zealand social housing complex is attracting very bad publicity indeed. A meeting is being held on Friday following a complaint of violence, abusive language, burglaries and even excrement being smeared on a neighbour's car. The meeting will be held in the office of the new Christchurch Central MP Duncan Webb, who told me a short time ago that it appears to be just one of the units and an arrest has now been made, meaning it may be possible to stop all of this happening. But we begin with the complex itself.
It's a relatively new complex in Phillipstown, one of the lower decile areas of Christchurch. It's 9 units, so it's relatively high density. And there's been some pretty disruptive behaviour. And I think everyone knows that the behaviour that's been going on is at one level unacceptable and in other instances just downright criminal. And it's pretty clear that we can't have that. So we've had incidents of domestic violence, there's suggestions of some burglaries, and also just sort of shouting and screaming, and then some incident where some excrement was wiped on someone's car. So all pretty unacceptable behaviour.
And it's not in dispute that this behaviour is coming from this complex?
No, there's no dispute there, and certainly, we've there's been complaints by residents and surrounding neighbours, and Housing New Zealand is involved, and the police are involved. So that steps are being taken here. 9
units. I'm guessing that not all the units are misbehaving in this way. The occupants of not all the units.
No, look, and I think it's really important to identify that, most people in these units just, they're in Housing New Zealand units, so social housing. They're perfectly decent, reasonable people, just want to live the quiet life like anyone else. But there's certainly one unit that is problematic. It appears there were some other people in other units, but they've actually moved on. So we've got, as I understand it, as of today, the police have actually made an arrest in relation to one of the burglaries. And that may address the issue as well, depending on what the outcome of that arrest is.
And that person, obviously if they've been arrested, this is still allegedly, but that person is from that unit, that one unit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I understand to be the case at this time, yeah.
Have you spoken to the police?
Look, my office has spoken to the police, but I haven't spoken personally.
But there's a meeting on Friday, right? This is a sort of all-in on Friday.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so there's a meeting with the police and with Housing New Zealand and with a whole lot of the affected residents from the Housing New Zealand units and from the neighbourhood to just come down and talk about what's gone on, to understand what steps Housing New Zealand are taking. You've got to remember that Housing New Zealand is just a landlord. They don't have any special powers. So just like any landlord, they've got to go through the residential tenancy procedures, and you can't just throw someone out because they're having a loud party occasionally. You've got to actually go through the tribunal process.
Presumably, though, if somebody has been arrested for burglary and is found guilty of burglary, and stuff like wiping excrement on cars and abusing people in domestic violence can be visited upon the same units in the complex, then eviction becomes a possibility, doesn't it, obviously?
Absolutely. And look, you've got to remember, of course, that Housing New Zealand provides social housing. It provides housing to people who are most in need. And, the Labor Party's just announced that it's finding 100 more houses in Christchurch for homeless people. And these are people with addiction problems sometimes and mental health problems and so on. They are the most difficult tenants. We don't want to evict people and just throw them out on the street because that's just putting the problem elsewhere and probably exacerbating the problem. So it's really important that, eviction is a last resort. And even when someone is evicted from one place, we still need to house them because we don't want people of any kind on the street.
So what happens next?
Well, look, that's what I'll find out on Friday. I think what's going to happen is the Housing New Zealand is actively managing the situation. The police know about it. They're involved, so that's really good. And obviously incidents of domestic violence are a top priority for them. So, look, I think the answer is things are happening, but this isn't unknown. High-density complexes in social housing, they will have problems, and we need to make sure we get onto them as soon as we can and not sort of ignore them until they blow up like this one has.
Duncan Webb, Christchurch Central MP. We will talk to him after that meeting on Friday, 5:24. Lots of feedback coming in already on the share market. This email from Lissa McDonald seems to sum up what you're saying. The correction, and Lissa uses quotation marks, in the stock market is simple proof that investors have absolutely no idea what they're doing. If they truly understood what stocks were worth, they would never have paid over the top for shares once they reach their true level. I imagine that the best investors have done very little buying for months, as the market has clearly been overvalued for that time. It's absurd to believe that when US GDP growth has been at 3 to 4%, that shares rise by over 10%. Thank you for your feedback. You can text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. New Zealand could reap some of the benefits of a really clever Australian marketing campaign which saw a 30-second ad screen during the American Super Bowl go global. There's also a longer version of it that is online. It is going off. The advertisement started out as if it were a trailer for a new Crocodile Dundee movie starring actors Chris Hemsworth, who it has to be said is very handsome, and Danny McBride.
Not a lot of crocs out here, huh? It's just 37,000 miles of pristine, beautiful beach, mate. Did you know that Australia makes some of the finest wines in the entire world?
No, I didn't know that.
Thank you very much.
Wait, hold up. This isn't a movie.
No.
It's a tourism ad for Australia.
Yes. But listen, you're the best Crocodile Dundee since Crocodile Dundee.
Really?
Yes, really. And we had the best trip ever, didn't we?
It was pretty sweet.
Great cameo from Paul Hogan, looking appalled. It turns out it was all pretty sweet. In the 2 days since the Super Bowl, the ad has reached hundreds of millions of people. And not only has it sparked a petition calling for a Paul Hogan comeback, it's also likely to bring economic benefits to New Zealand because, well, we're Australia's neighbour. People visit Australia, they tend to come here too in many cases. John O'Sullivan is Tourism Australia's managing director. A short time ago, he told me that the Super Bowl ad is really just the beginning of this campaign.
We've hit somewhere over 370 million people, so I think that's pretty conservative. I mean, there's just different reports and lots of numbers flying around, but it's already delivered for us about a $65 million earned advertising value, which when you line that up against the total cost of the campaign that we're putting into the US market, which is about $36 million over a couple of years, I mean, the ad has already more than, paid for itself in many respects, and that's before you put in, I think the television audience for the Super Bowl is around about 110, 120 million people.
So you're saying in terms of the cost of the entire campaign, that one ad has already delivered you $2 for every dollar spent?
Yeah, pretty much, and I mean that's before we even get into the conversion piece. And what we're hearing now from some of our in-market partners like Qantas Holidays and a few other travel agents over in the market, they're already seeing something of about a doubling or sometimes a tripling of interest or visits to websites or inquiries about Australia as a result.
So that stuff is truly measurable, right? So your hits on your tourist partners, Qantas being an obvious example, that's absolutely measurable. And so you've seen a significant increase after the ad's gone to air.
That's right, and that's why we chose the Super Bowl. Not only does it give us reach in the US market, and importantly for us, it talks to about 50% of our target audience in that market alone. But we also know that it's a proven winner in terms of sales and also brand perceptions, which were the two things that we were trying to address in the market.
What was Paul Hogan like, and what was his response to it?
Look, I think Hogs is a national living treasure for Australia. I mean, what he's done for our country, particularly in the US, since the mid-1980s or the early 1980s when he did the Come Say G'day commercials for the Australian Tourist Commission, but then, with the first two Crocodile Dundee films in particular, he really did put Australia on the map in the US.
He did. He absolutely did. They love it. Why do they love it so much? I mean,
look, I think, what I think it comes down to, John, it really comes down to Americans like destinations where they feel welcome. Americans like destinations like Australia and also New Zealand where, they feel safe. They like the experiences that both countries offer, good food and wine, a good premium and luxury product, which, both countries have a good reputation for over in the US. And, they like the fact, particularly what they tell us about Australia, is that they like the fact that they feel like if they break down on the side of the road, an Australian will pull over, and they might not know how to fix the car, but they'll give it a go and they'll try and help them. They also talk about, anecdotally about, parties are always better with an Australian in the room, and it's probably a little bit, New Zealanders say that too, but particularly when we're watching the All Blacks play the Wallabies, because usually that means you've got someone to take the mickey out of being the Australian. But
that's very generous of you. Can I talk about your generosity? Because there is a sense that once people come into our neighbourhood, often they will do both countries, right? They will start in Australia and then go to New Zealand or vice versa. So can we expect, and I'm sorry to bring self-interest into this interview, but by golly, why not? Can we expect that we will see some traffic increase as a result of this?
Oh, look, I think undoubtedly. I mean, we know that the North American audience, we know the North American visitors, there is a certain percentage of them. I think from an Australian point of view, it's about 15% of American visitors that come here have gone to New Zealand either before or on their way home. Undoubtedly, I think it will go well, which is why, in terms of a competitive point of view, we think it's great when New Zealand does well in international tourism, because the fact that it means that the regional is doing well, and I think that's really important, particularly from markets like China, but, also the US. And so, look, I think undoubtedly there's a halo effect, because both countries are seen in markets like the US as having, great natural beauty. They're seen as having friendly people. They're seen as having great food and wine. Both countries have a really strong Indigenous culture, and that's really important to American visitors. So, from that point of view, if there's an extra spin-off for Tourism New Zealand, we're happy to help, and we'll be very modest in the commission we ask for.
I was just going to say, you're a charming man, but you have to clip. There's nothing wrong with clipping the ticket. That's the Australian way. John O'Sullivan, who is head of Tourism Australia, they came up with that commercial. It's a phenomenal success. I did say to him later in the interview that I've never met anyone like Paul Hogan in Australia. I just met a whole lot of people who stand around and drink Chardonnay and talk about the latest Kate Blanchett play. But he says they do exist, 2 or 3 of them. Anyway, you are with Checkpoint, and it's coming up to 28 minutes to 6. Nice to have you with us. Coming up on the program, the world's most powerful rocket has liftoff. The record-breaking hot summer causes high numbers of fish to die in our waterways. And we will see more of that. And when is a tip-top not a tip-top ice cream? When it's imported from Spain? Don't forget, we would love your feedback. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Facebook, Checkpoint with John Campbell, where you can watch us also too, of course, and email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Giles with the latest on the markets next. But before it all, Katrina with the headlines.
A sense of calm has returned to global stock markets, with gains on Wall Street being followed by Asian stock markets rebounding. Japan's Nikkei index has climbed more than 3% after falling nearly 7% in the previous session. The recovery follows choppy trading in the US, which ended positively. The New Zealand share market closed this afternoon slightly down. Consumer New Zealand wants tanning beds totally banned. It says its researchers visited 58 sunbed clinics around the country and found that nearly half were not checking the age of their customer or doing a formal skin assessment or providing eye protection. Consumer's Chief Executive Sue Chetwin says the study has been done regularly for the past 10 years and the results are always disappointing. Rescuers are combing through the rubble of collapsed buildings in and around the Taiwanese city of Hualien, seeking survivors of this morning's 6.4 earthquake. At least 2 people died and more than 200 were injured. Officials say all survivors have now been freed from a 10-storey hotel that partly collapsed in the quake and was left tilted at a dramatic angle. The unusually hot summer is causing more fish than normal to die along Kapiti waterways. The local iwi says it's received several reports of dead eel and trout along the Waikanae River. The Wellington Regional Council says it's not uncommon for fish to die in summer, but the exceptionally hot weather is killing more than usual. The former Labour Party Cabinet Minister and Deputy Leader Annette King is expected to take up the position of Australian High Commissioner later this year. Chris Seed has been the High Commissioner since 2013 and is due to return to New Zealand by the end of the year. Dame Annette left Parliament last year after 33 years as an MP and was made a Dame in this year's New Year honours. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
I think Annette King may have a grandchild in Australia.
I think yeah,
yes.
a couple. I think,
yeah, it's very exciting for her. 25 and a half to 6. This goes to Giles Beckford beaming in from Wellington. Giles, the word of the day is calm, and by golly, you're looking it. You don't look like you've been assailed by dramatic collapses anywhere.
John, it was very, very calm indeed. Now, you as a fledgling junior stockbroker in your day may have some distant memories of the 87 crash and certainly some of the corrections after that. I can remember on the day of the 87 crash, being down on the floor of the Wellington Stock Exchange, you really could see the furrowed brow, the narrowed eyes, the sweaty palms, the shaking palms, and the chalkies frantically putting up prices and then rubbing them down as much as just as they'd finished. None of that today. Of course, it's all on screens, but we knew there was going to be a bit of a hit. We watched the market open, bang, down about 2%, nearly 200 points. And I thought, well, who's to know, will it last? But the good sign was that, of course, that Wall Street ended strongly. And from that point of view, you thought that really the damage was always going to be probably limited in New Zealand. And so it's proved to be. We've got to wait. We've in fact had worse days this year than what we've had today.
Yeah, thank you, because you're going to update the markets for us at the end, aren't you? But you do want to talk about the unemployment, the latest unemployment figures?
Indeed, these are for the 3 months ended December, and people had been expecting a wee bit of a soft showing because the previous 3 months, the ones ended in September, had been just astronomically strong. We'd created something like 56,000 jobs, and everybody thought there would be a bit of payback and slowdown. But in fact, it's a little bit stronger than expected, about 12,000 jobs created in the past 3 months. The unemployment rate fell down to 4.5%. That's the lowest since late 2008. And on that point of view, you would say that this is a labour market that's reasonably tight. You burrow into the numbers, there are just a few little signs that perhaps we have a mismatch between those who are looking for work, but they actually don't have the skills to fill the jobs that are available. And that's a well-known story as well. On the wages side, it was steady, an annual rate of 1.9%. That's where it was in the previous quarter. And on that basis, there's not too much in the way of wage inflation coming through. Boil it all down, remembering that the Reserve Bank later this year will have a mandate to try and keep employment at full levels. It does take into account employment now and wages. You'd have to say on the basis of these numbers, it wouldn't have changed its interest rate calls that it's going to make. And in fact, we'll see that tomorrow. We'll have the first interest rate review from the RBNZ.
Thanks, Charles. First of the major company earnings reports out today too, right?
Just a very quick touch. We're going to get inundated in the next few weeks, and you're going to be bored of hearing from Nona, myself and Jono on that. But ASB Bank, the number 4 ranked bank in the country, owned by CBA in Australia, a bumper half-year result for them, $593 million after tax. Good earnings across the board for them. The decline in their profit margins, in their interest rate margins, has finally stopped. So they actually had a slight growth, but a good fall in their bad and doubtful debts. That's a sign of an economy that's in pretty good shape. So they were pretty cheerful, although they sort of underplayed a wee bit when I interviewed them. Fair to say that they're probably on course for $1 billion plus full year profit, which we'll see in August.
The dividend going to the Australian parent, of course, Giles.
Well, naturally.
Yeah.
That's because you're one of the few lucky New Zealanders to have CBA in your portfolio.
Yeah. What have the markets finished on?
Well, at the end of the day, the top 50 index down 47 points. That's just under 0.6% at 8195. As I was saying, we've had 4 days worse than that this year. So put it into perspective, last year the share market rose 22%. In the past 5 years, our share market has doubled in size. You get a little bit of payback on that. On this basis, Australia's also looking good. They're up just under 1%, and markets through Asia are generally stronger as well. So perhaps we've seen the last of the immediate knee-jerk and the worry, although the expectation is that there will be a bit of volatility for some time to come as markets just calm down. On the currency front, we can tell you the New Zealand dollar 73.1 US cents and 92.7 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thank you very much indeed, Giles. Lots of people getting in touch with us tonight. Frank asking, hey, if more tourists come as a result of that Australian campaign, do we actually have the infrastructure to deal with them? Tourism infrastructure is already straining at the seams. Perhaps we should sort it out before we get more. Frank suggests. Thank you, Frank. Text us 2101. Let's go to the weather now with Met Service meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Another feed of that warm air from the north means it's going to be a pretty warm start today in Auckland, 16 degrees Celsius, rising to around about 23 degrees Celsius, but more cloud arriving as we head through towards the afternoon. Some wetter weather pushing it back in towards Northland through the daytime. Some heavier falls to watch out for later on Thursday. Still pretty warm though, temperatures around about 18 degrees Celsius starting off, but highs of 22. Best spot to be though, down towards Whanganui. We are going to find our highs around about 26. For Wellington, it's a fine looking day, plenty of sunshine, staying dry, bit of patchy cloud, but highs back to around about 23 degrees Celsius. But there is more cloud on that eastern side of the North Line, and with that, some patchy rain through Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Temperatures, though, still very warm through the night times and not bad through the day, but not nearly as high as we have seen recently. For the South Island, high pressure sits over us, and for many places, it's a fine, dry day. Back to around about 21 degrees Celsius for Christchurch, for a bit of a cooler start around about 9 degrees Celsius or so. But for many of us, it is a fine looking day on the South Island. Plenty of dry weather, plenty of sunshine, but it is going to be a bit of a cool start, particularly for those places of central Otago, but highs back to around 21 degrees Celsius for Invercargill and Dunedin. And that's it from me.
Thanks, John. Overnight low of 7 in Invercargill. What a weird old summer you guys are having. We turn now to the case of a former Air Force spy who stole from the Defence Force. We covered this at length on Checkpoint as recently as last week, but not the issue behind it. When the High Court upheld a police appeal against a District Court decision to discharge the man without conviction, the High Court judge expressed sympathy with what the man had been through. Now, just where Intelligence Officer Richard Graham had served, what he saw and what sensitive equipment he later stole has been kept a secret. But the High Court judge has supported comments that he didn't get proper treatment when he returned from an overseas deployment. And the case has shone a light on the issue of how soldiers and veterans are treated after being posted overseas, when they have been exposed to traumatic violence and high-stress situations. Now, that's an issue that's much bigger than just this one man, and our court reporter, Edward Gay, investigates.
Corporal Richard Graham walked free from court in July after getting a discharge without conviction, despite admitting 6 charges, including burglary and offering to supply methamphetamine. However, following a High Court appeal by the Crown, that decision was overturned and he's now been convicted. But in her judgment, Justice Hinton said she accepted the District Court judge's comments about Graham's situation, that he'd been sent to a hostile environment by the armed forces and didn't receive proper treatment when he returned to New Zealand. The judge also cited an affidavit from Graham's superior officer, who said of the 13 personnel who served overseas with Graham, 3 had reported difficulties readjusting to normal life. The officer also noted 5 others had what is described as behavioural changes. The Defence Force has declined to comment on the supported office personnel. No Duff is an organisation that provides emergency support for veterans in crisis. RNZ asked its founder and former soldier Aaron Wood if the Defence Force was doing enough to support its people.
Short answer, no. However, they are trying. They are applying themselves, and they are working very hard to change that. And they've come a long way, even in just the last couple of years. I guess the question is why has it taken the last couple of years to turn things right around?
Mr Wood says it's not unusual for vets to get caught up with the police.
We often find as well in NODAF when things start going downhill with a veteran, they go down pretty quickly, and that's the reason why we have our 2-hour notice to move stipulation, because when they ask for help especially, they really, really need help, because it's part of the culture that you don't ask for help unless things are really bad.
No Duff has an army of volunteers and takes its name from military slang, meaning this is not a drill. It was born after Mr Wood got a call from a friend working for the RSA. A young veteran had gone missing and there were fears for his safety. Using his network of contacts and social media, Mr Wood says they were able to find the man within 2 hours.
He was living rough in a park, public park, and we basically put someone of his generation and his background next to him. for a while, for a few hours, just to talk them through a few things. I linked them back up with Veterans Affairs, and then we employed an ad hoc network of support.
That was 2 years ago. Since then, they've responded to 168 cases, putting boots on the ground inside 2 hours.
We've started off as an ambulance parked at the bottom of the cliff, which is never ideal. And we're working through, as I said, we started off that way, and we've begun pretty quickly, actually, after our establishment started working through a number of initiatives to push that ambulance further and further up the cliff, and then preferably to the top and then back from the edge and build a nice big wall.
He says Graham would have been offered psychological support after his mission, but not all personnel feel they can take up the offer of help.
It's about the team. The team survives by working with each other, by maintaining teamwork. You start being an individual and people start getting hurt or dying. So there's a real incentive there to be a part of the team and to not let the team down. And this is where the issue starts coming along for most people, most guys especially, is they don't want to let the team down. They don't want to stick their hand up and ask for help. There's always someone else. Always someone else who needs it more than you do.
Mr Wood, a former Army medic, recalls an incident over 20 years ago when an Army truck rolled. Injured soldiers had been laid out on the side of the road by the time he arrived.
Every single one of them went, no, I'm good, I'm sweet, mate. He needs it more than I do, pointing to the guy next to him. So, okay, sweet, and I'll go to the next guy. I got to the end, and I just stop and go, listen, let's just, don't tell me to go to the next guy. You're all injured to some degree. Just let me do my job. Because none of them wanted to be the one to get the help when they thought the next guy along needed it. And that's the mentality. They'll literally die before they ask for help because they think their mate could do with it more. Or they think they're going to be taking resources away from someone who needs it more.
He says asking for help doesn't get any easier after leaving the military.
They don't necessarily understand you. They don't understand what you've been through, what you've done, especially when you're trying to talk to civilians in general. So they can ask some pretty, how can I put it, less than ideal questions, shall we say. The kind of questions you never ask anyone, politely, but because you're a soldier, they think they can ask that kind of thing to your face, even though they're complete strangers. So a lot of veterans withdraw. They don't say much about their service at all, and they literally soldier on in silence and suffer in silence, which is tragic.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Bill Blakey has been there. In 2004, he was the Deputy Director of Intelligence for the entire coalition force in Afghanistan. His book, Back from the Brink, details his daily routine that involved constantly assessing risk and danger while making life and death decisions. Mr Blakey says getting help while being in the military is difficult, as there's a fear that having mental health issues can affect your career.
There is that stigma of mental health issues and that macho man image that, if you admit that you've got an injury like post-traumatic stress, then you're not really able to cope with much. So therefore, you try and hide it as best you can. I do know individuals who seek psychiatric help on the side without letting the military know, and that's just a fact of the way business is done.
After 25 years in the military, Mr Blakey was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition that's estimated to affect between 12 and 18% of all veterans who serve overseas. It's triggered by terrifying events that can cause flashbacks, nightmares and severe anxiety. For Mr Blakey, it meant he couldn't even sit in a small room with other people and would constantly evaluate how to escape.
You're battling it constantly, from the time you wake up until the time you go to sleep. And unfortunately, in my case, it rears its ugly head when I'm asleep in nightmares. That can be really, really powerful, and it can put you off balance for a couple of days.
Mr Blakey sought help through Veteran Affairs. He went on medication and had some counselling, but took himself off the meds as he believed his situation had improved. Instead, his condition worsened.
Well, obviously, it got to the brink of the abyss because that was when I had my attempts on my life twice over because there was no way that I could see any way out. And I thought, for me, it was best if I wasn't on the scene.
He describes himself at the time as being completely out of control. The road to recovery was long. He sought help from a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, and went through an alcohol rehabilitation program. With the help of his supportive wife and family, he raised funds to attend a group therapy program in Australia, something not offered here in New Zealand. Mr Blakey says leaving the Defence Force is like leaving a cocoon. Suddenly you're out of your comfort zone.
A lot of people find it hard. Who do you turn to? Who do you open up to? how do you put your hand up and say, hey, I've got an issue? And unfortunately, for a lot of people, it gets to the nth degree where, unfortunately, some take their lives, or people end up on Skid Row and on drugs and on alcohol issues and things like that before they actually seek any help or are able to get any help. And it's that gap that needs to be closed.
He says defence personnel need to put their hands up and admit they have a problem so they can get the support they need before they leave the force. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gay aho.
And if you think you know someone who may need to hear Edward's piece, it will be up online very shortly. It's 10:05 to 6. Another piece of space history has been made at Cape Canaveral in Florida today. The most powerful rocket ever built, the Falcon Heavy, was successfully launched by SpaceX. It's the brainchild of the company's billionaire CEO Elon Musk, who called it a game changer. The launch was a vital test for the rocket. On board was dummy cargo, which included one of Mr. Musk's Tesla cars. The BBC's science correspondent Victoria Gill has this report.
10, 9, 8.
Side booster ignition.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
A countdown to a critical moment. The world's most powerful rocket ignited all 27 of its engines at once and lifted off. Less than 10 minutes later, in a carefully choreographed aerial dance, its boosters separated and headed back towards Earth. 2 landed simultaneously at the Kennedy Space Center, while the third headed for a drone ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And apart from its power, it's this recycling of the rocket, slashing the cost of a launch, that makes this a breakthrough in the business of space travel. SpaceX's ambitions have previously produced some high-profile failures. This Falcon 9 rocket exploded on the launch pad in 2016, destroying a $260 million satellite. But this test makes Falcon Heavy the most capable rocket since Saturn V, the vehicle that NASA used to take the first astronauts to the moon almost half a century ago. Now, the US Space Agency, already one of SpaceX's customers, will watch this test closely. This could be a candidate for launching more advanced robots and ultimately humans on missions to Mars. But ever the showman of commercial space travel, Elon Musk let loose his own Tesla Roadster into space, complete with a space-suited mannequin in the driving seat and David Bowie on a loop on the radio. As the drama of this launch is celebrated back on Earth, Mr. Musk says his car could be on a journey around the sun for up to 1 billion years.
Victoria Gill reporting there, and after the launch, Elon Musk reportedly said it was a big relief. He said he'd had an image of a giant explosion on the pad with wheels bouncing down the road and the SpaceX logo landing somewhere with a thud, but he said fortunately that's not what happened, adding crazy things sometimes come true. Speaking of which, we received a text from someone too shy to talk to us on air saying there are whales in Evans Bay. If you don't know Wellington, Evans Bay is a central city, a central harbour inlet that heads down towards the airport there. If you are on the hill, so what's that, Haitaitai, and you are looking out over the whales, do text us 2101 and we'll call you back, because that must be a sight to behold. If you can look out your window now, listeners in Haitaitai and Roseneath, Miramar up on the hill there, if you can see them, text us 2101. We'd love to have them described for us. The record-breaking hot summer is causing high numbers of fish to die in Kapiti waterways. Local iwi are concerned after receiving more than 12 reports of dead eel and trout along the Waikanai River. And it's not just Kapiti. Fish and game say water temperatures and levels nationwide are causing problems. And there is a worry, of course, there will be more and more of this. Katie Scotcher reports.
To cool off after a week of extreme temperatures, Kapiti resident Olivia Harris took her family to the Waikanai River, a popular choice among locals. They went to 3 different spots along the river and found multiple dead juvenile eels at each.
They found about 3 different ones, 3 smaller baby eels, and they were dead. And so, kids think it's hilarious to find dead things and touch them, which I don't think is nice. But with the same thing happening again at a different location, it did definitely stay with me as being interesting.
She says the water in the river was so warm it felt tropical. Wellington Regional Council Marine and Freshwater spokesperson Megan Oliver says in the last week of January the river hit 27 degrees. She says she's not surprised at the number of dead fish.
Our field teams have come across fish in distress or even eels stranded, and it's simply that the water's got too hot, and often dissolved oxygen concentrations go down as water temperature increases, and animals may seek refuge outside of the water, or in fact they may be stranded if the water's evaporating very quickly.
Megan Oliver says the deaths aren't unnatural, and it's something that happens most summers. Environmental manager for the local Kapiti iwi, Mahina Arangi Baker, monitors the region's waterways closely. She says the high number of reports and photos of dead fish from members of the community is an economic concern for her iwi.
For us, this is very much an economic issue as well. Freshwater species like tuna or eel are actually feeding our people, and for us it's about ensuring our people and our marae don't lose access to fisheries that actually support our community and are a key part of who we are socially.
But the Kapiti Coast isn't the only place affected, with a high number of dead fish also recorded in the Hawke's Bay and Southland. Fishing Game's Adam Daniel says hot weather reduces water levels and the high water temperatures affects fish habitat.
Once you get to that critically low level, there's fewer pools and hiding places for the fish as well, and you're not going to get as much of that bubbly oxygenated water coming off the rocks as it flows down the streams.
Niwa says the summer's hot temperatures are set to ease this week, so the number of distressed fish should also decrease. But Mahina Arangi Baker says local iwi and the members of the Kapiti community have to think of how to best protect the fish in the long run. For Checkpoint, Katie Scotcher.
Thank you, Katie. 4.5 to 6, a press release just in from DOC. It says it's responding to 2 possible sightings of a black cat at Islington Bay, which connects Rangitoto and Motutapu Islands in the Hauraki Gulf. Both islands have been free of cats, rats, possums, mice and other animal predators and pests since 2011, so a black cat is not a welcome visitor. DOC says it's sending 2 conservation dogs trained to detect cats, I bet they like that job, and their handler to Islington Bay in the morning. It will also be placing motion-sensitive cameras and cat tracking devices on both sides of the bay where members of the public have reported seeing a black cat. Holy Halido. Is that how I meant to say that? One of New Zealand's most iconic brands, Tip Top, has been importing ice creams from Spain and advertising them on their website as being New Zealand made from local ingredients. Only the fine print on the packaging of the Duo ice cream sandwich and the popsicle watermelon wedgie shows they're made in Spain, or at least that was the case until RNZ started making inquiries. Here is Sarah Robson.
One Auckland ice cream fan, Max Barker-Cowan, says he's eaten a few Tip Top Duo ice cream sandwiches over the summer.
I really enjoyed it. It's really handy. There's no stick. You get to eat all of it. It's great.
But he says he was confused when he discovered they were made in Spain.
If something is frozen and it has Tip Top on the front of it, then it was made in New Zealand. I just didn't think that it would even be feasible for something to be shipped from overseas.
And down at a blustery Mission Bay this afternoon, others were also surprised to discover the Duo and the watermelon wedgie were made overseas.
First I've ever heard of it, yeah. I've tried the Duo sandwich before, which was all right.
What do you think about Tip Top importing a couple of their ice creams this summer?
From where?
Spain.
What? No, I wouldn't buy something from Spain, not ice creams anyway. New Zealand ones are really, really good, aren't they?
The director of Tip Top, Kim Bellinger, says this is the first time in a while that the company has imported some of its products. She says as well as developing new products locally, the company looks around the world for new ice creams they think New Zealanders might like.
We try these products and then if they go well, then we want to do them and produce them in-house. And buy new equipment to do so.
Ms Bellinger says at the moment Tip Top doesn't have the technology to make either the Duo or the watermelon wedgie locally, but the company is committed to making ice creams in New Zealand. And Ms Bellinger says Tip Top was trying to be transparent about where the products were being made by putting it on the packaging.
It's completely a product that's produced under our control. We have complete control. It's our recipe. It's produced the same standards of, as I said, no palm oil, all natural colours and flavours, and to the degree that they'd expect from our products made locally. So give it a go, have a try, tell us if you like it. If you like it, we're committed to doing it. locally here in New Zealand.
Fonterra says advertising the ice creams as New Zealand made on the Tip Top website was an error. But will Max Barker Cowan buy another duo, knowing what he knows now?
I'm definitely going to have a hard think again before I go and get another duo. Not too sure yet.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It is 1 minute before 6 o'clock. Katrina has just arrived into the studio,
yes,
carrying the 6 o'clock news with her. And so will join us very shortly. Nice to have you here, KB. After the news at 6, we're going to just check in on what's happening in the Asian markets. But there has been a very big bounce, as happened in Australia too. New Zealand, of course, saved from having to bounce by the fact that we were closed. The New Zealand share market was closed on Waitangi Day yesterday, when all the global markets went down in response to Wall Street's largest ever points fall, not percentage fall, on Monday. So we'll have more of that after the news at 6. We're also going to Taranaki, where our really good regional reporter Robin Martin is filing on the largest tertiary education provider in Taranaki and what it is up to, and more on, well, actually quite a lot coming up after 6 o'clock. So do stay with us. If you have feedback, it is very welcome. In fact, we're getting a lot of it tonight, and we're delighted to hear from you. Text us 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We are, of course, on Facebook and on Twitter, and we are always delighted to hear from you at 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten, aho. Pharmac is rejecting any suggestion it reacted to political pressure to fund a new anti-HIV drug. It announced today that from next month it'll expand access to a treatment using Truvada. The drug's already funded for those infected with HIV, but will now also be free for those not infected but at high risk of contracting HIV. Last July, the Labour Party accused the then National Party of dragging its heels over funding Truvada. However, Pharmac's Chief Executive Sarah Fitt says the drug has been assessed under normal processes with no fast-tracking since the election.
Throughout last year, we've been working with the New Zealand AIDS Foundation and actually helped them put an application through to us, and then it went through our normal process where we got clinical advice. It got a high priority recommendation for the high-risk group from our clinical advisors, so we took it through our normal process.
Sarah Fitt. The AIDS Foundation says the funding decision is a game changer that could halve or drive down the rate of HIV infection. A New Zealander in Taiwan says many small earthquakes have shaken the east coast of Taiwan in the past 2 weeks before today's big quake. Centred near the port city of Hualien, this morning's 6.4 quake killed at least 4 people and injured scores more. Streets were buckled and a hotel was left dramatically tilted on its side. Aucklander Alice Liu, who's currently in the capital Taipei, about 120 kilometres north of Hualien, describes the moment the quake hit.
It suddenly became really big, like very strong. So that's when I got out of my room, and then so did my parents, and then we were wondering what we should do. We should go out or not, and then it just kind of stopped. We weren't sure if it was going to start again.
Alice Liu says she wouldn't be surprised if there are more tremors in the coming days. The New Zealand share market has ended the day a bit bruised but not mauled as other markets have been. It finished slightly down, although analysts say it may be too soon to declare an end to the correction in share values. A sense of calm returned to global stock markets earlier today, with gains on Wall Street being followed by Asian stocks rebounding. Japan's Nikkei index has climbed more than 3% after falling nearly 7% in the previous session. The MP for Christchurch Central, Duncan Webb, is calling a meeting of residents of a Housing New Zealand housing complex that's attracted bad publicity. There have been complaints of violence, abusive language, burglaries and even excrement smeared on a car. Mr Webb says it's the occupants of just one of the units causing problems, and someone from that address has been arrested. He says Housing New Zealand is managing the situation.
Housing New Zealand provides social housing, provides housing to people who are most in need. And these are people with addiction problems sometimes and mental health problems and so on. They are the most difficult tenants. We don't want to evict people and just throw them out on the street because that's just putting the problem elsewhere.
Duncan Webb says the meeting will be held on Friday. The Ministry of Social Development has got the green light to turn a Blenheim motel into emergency housing. Resource consent for redeveloping Bryden accommodation has been granted after a commissioner hearing. The ministry said last year it wants to use the site to help homeless people move on to permanent affordable housing. It told RNZ News the building is in a good location, close to local amenities, and is already built in a way that makes it ideal for supporting families. The Marlborough District Council says some people were unhappy about the plan, so resource consent was needed. Upper Hutt's Central Library has been closed because it's an earthquake risk. The City Council says recent engineering reports have identified parts of the building as quake-prone, or less than 34% of the building code standard. Its Chief Executive, Chris Upton, says the safety of staff and customers is the primary concern. The Council says it will now have to look at what to do about the building and library services. A privacy row has broken out in Australia over a newspaper story about the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, who's expecting a child with his former press secretary. The story has been published on the front page of Sydney's Daily Telegraph. Last month, Mr Joyce confirmed in Parliament he'd separated from his wife Natalie. She's released a statement saying the situation is devastating for the couple's 4 daughters, and having it played out in public makes it worse. Some MPs have also raised concerns, saying women should not be dragged into the public eye for doing nothing more than having a partner who's a politician. It's 6:05. Sport, and an elusive Commonwealth singles gold medal is the priority for leading New Zealand squash player Joelle King, who's been named in a 7-strong team for the Gold Coast Games. She says she's in the best form of her career after beating the current world champion in a recent tournament final in the United States. King won a bronze in the singles at Glasgow 4 years ago and a gold and bronze in the doubles and mixed doubles in Delhi 4 years before that.
It's a really good feeling, I guess, all season. I feel like I've been playing good squash and going through a lot of rounds in the bigger events, but to actually win one is pretty special, and against someone who's really in form, it gives me a massive confidence boost going forward.
Joelle King. Fiji captain Kevin Nangama has called for the Fiji National Rugby League Board to be dismissed and has said again that players will boycott international competition until they get their World Cup prize money. Nangama has labelled the administration unprofessional, saying it was late paying player allowances for last year's Cup and that the players are still waiting on $125,000 for reaching the semi-finals. 15 more Russians have appealed to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in a bid to compete at the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. The 13 athletes and 2 coaches are from a group of 28 who last week had Olympic life bans for doping overturned by the court. That's the news.
A heavy stock market tumble.
It's exceptionally unnerving, but on the other hand, I think after the run we've had, we shouldn't be particularly surprised.
A heavy shock and crumble.
They're climbing up on the building, they're using cranes to get inside the building, there's people on ladders. They're really trying everything they can to get these people out.
And a heavy rocket ready to rumble.
A big chunk of metal. If all goes well, this car will launch on a really long orbit.
Take off with Morning Report with Guy Naspiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to Noon, becoming scam savvy, the huge range of online frauds targeting young and old, and how to avoid them. And after 10, Mary Lynn Bracht on her Korean heritage and writing about the tens of thousands of comfort women enslaved by the Japanese army in the Second World War. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to Noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Coromandel Peninsula, isolated showers. They should have cleared this afternoon and they're mainly fine. Rain developing in the east tomorrow morning, spreading elsewhere by evening. Auckland and Bay of Plenty, showers clearing and becoming mostly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui, Taupo, Taranaki and Taihape, cloudy periods and isolated showers today, fine tomorrow with increasing high cloud. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy, patchy rain for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Whanganui to Wellington, fine with a few cloudy periods. Nelson, Buller, Westland, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, mostly fine, however isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. For Fiordland and Southland, a few light showers clearing this afternoon, then fine. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a chance of a light shower. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina Batten. I appreciate it. We're going to go back to Giles Beckford because we just want to update what's happening in both Australia and Asia after the highest ever points crash or fall on Wall Street, not in percentage terms, 87 in the GFC, both bigger, but in points terms off a very high mark, the highest ever Wall Street fall on the Dow Jones on Monday. Asia and Australia, Europe all followed suit. New Zealand was closed, of course, for Waitangi, but Giles is joining us again. Paul Lecomte, who is a fantastic supporter of Checkpoint and a great lover of Dunedin, is just tweeting. Giles, are you there?
I am indeed, John.
I want to read this out to you because praise is not something we deal with at RNZ. We're far too Presbyterian to praise each other's work, and we don't want to get carried away with flannel. But Paul Lecomte says...
We are public broadcasters.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Paul Lecomte says the RNZ business correspondents have that rare ability, along with the likes of Rod Oram, to explain this insane world of numbers and bell curves and words we can all understand. Vital stuff. He's talking about you, Giles Beckford.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's much appreciated. That's what we're here for. That's why we do the job that we do. It's why we enjoy the job that we do.
Well, nicely put. What's happening? What's the latest on the markets?
Well, looking to Australia, which has just closed, it's held on to its gains, or most of its gains. It's up about 0.9%. That's 51 points for the ASX 200. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index currently up 1%. And in Tokyo, the Nikkei is currently up around 3%, a little bit more trading there to do. But it looks like that generally the panic is over. The early futures prices that I have seen pointing to London, Europe, and indeed to Wall Street are all modestly higher. There is undoubtedly a degree of nervousness and jitters are still out there, as you would well expect. But for the time being, it would seem that the precipitous falls that we've seen and then the just as dramatic rises as we saw on Wall Street, for the time being, they might just be over. But let's not forget that these are markets and anything can happen, especially in a time when a lot of the trading is triggered by what they call algorithmic, which is basically computer trading. You put into your little black box, you say that when the Dow Jones Industrial Average hits 25,000, I want you to sell 10% of my portfolio, and bang, it executes those trades. It says when the Dow Jones is down at 23,000, I want you to buy these particular stocks at this price level, and it goes and does it for you. These things just happen. Humans aren't involved, and of course they can exacerbate the size of the moves and the volatility.
I cannot believe that. So, at 25,000 points, a whole lot of computer selling was just triggered. It's just unbelievable. Bang. Yeah. It's not exactly. I mean, there's lots of people texting in saying this feels like a casino to me. Well, actually, that lack of sophistication kind of supports that thesis, doesn't it?
Indeed, my mum used to call stock markets bingo with a bowler hat. She had a rather quaint Midlands view of share markets, but she wasn't necessarily wrong. I mean, it's speculation. You are chasing the best return that you can get. You're making guesses as to when is the good time to buy, when is the good time to sell. Part of today's selling, for instance, would have been people who have cashed in on stratospheric rises for companies such as A2 Milk, Synlait, Comvita, Pushpay Holdings. Now, if you bought them a year ago on the expectation they were going to rise, you see that the market is turning, you cash in, and in fact, you make a good capital gain, and then you'll wait actually for things to settle, and you'll come in and you'll buy at the lower price, and you'd start the cycle all over again. And this is what share markets are.
I was with Brad Gordon at Hobson's here in Auckland on Shortland Street, and he was saying that the extraordinary thing is that basically the Dow just went up and up and up and up and up, and that we will now perhaps see more volatility. And I think you've been speaking to somebody who was saying the same thing, right?
Indeed. The New Zealand market perhaps hasn't been quite so stratospheric. The Dow Jones up 44% in a little over a year. Our own just up 22% for the top 50. But really the volatility that we've seen is likely to stay. Rob Mercer, who's the head of private wealth research at the broking house Forsyth Barr, thinks that we'll see this for a little time to come.
I think we are definitely going to see a bit of volatility for a few weeks. I don't think we're going to see this volatility just disappear. So I think investors should be patient, stick with quality, and look to come back into the market if they've been fortunate enough to put some away in cash and come out from the buy side. And we're not just talking about New Zealand here, we're also talking about globally. You know, we see better value for investors actually globally than we do in the New Zealand market at current levels.
Well, that's Rob Mercer from Forsyth Bar. He always has a good insight into what's going on. The other factor that perhaps local investors might want to take into account in the coming weeks is that we are just coming into our reporting season. This is where companies, or most of the big companies on the market, will be giving their 6-month or their 12-monthly reports on how their earnings are, how their revenue is going, whether the profits are up or down. We haven't had too many warnings so far of any surprises coming out there, but we can expect some close attention on the likes of Fletcher Building, which of course has been through the wars in the past 6 to 12 months. And we'll also be looking at some of the others, such as A2 Milk, Synlait. We'll also have a look at Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. Those companies which are, should we say, exposed to the real economy, such as the utilities. Pretty boring earnings, but I think people will be wanting to see that's the real measure of the return of the corporate scene in this country. We are dividend rich. It's what drives our share market, and I think investors will be making judgments accordingly. But for the time being, I think we're in for a little bit of a bumpy ride, but perhaps no reason to get too panicked by it.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. People loving your mum's bingo with the bowler hat line. Thanks, Giles. Really appreciate all the stuff you've told us about tonight. It's coming up to 6:15. A lot of people texting in about stresses on tourism infrastructure and the idea that we might get more tourists as a result of this Australian campaign. Some really quite long and detailed texts about that. Thank you. We'll follow up on the story. I'm just looking at Pip, my boss. He's in the control room. I think we'll do this for tomorrow night. He says unilaterally. And Pip is nodding. Let's head back to Asia. We've been there a lot tonight with the markets as well. Rescuers are combing through the rubble of collapsed buildings in and around the Taiwanese city of Hualien, seeking survivors of this morning's 6.4 earthquake. At least 4 people have been killed and up to 225 injured. Images from the city, which is home to around 100,000 people, show tilted structures, including a partially collapsed hotel, scattered debris and extensive damage to roads. The BBC's Andrew Plant reports.
The power of this earthquake now becoming clearer. Buildings partially pushed over, lower floors crushed, cars beneath the rubble, as emergency workers use ladders to smash glass, still searching for anyone who might be trapped inside. People worked through the night, rushing to help those trapped in their homes, fearing the buildings were about to come down. A child is lowered from a kitchen window. At least 4 high-rise buildings are close to collapse, their foundations crumbling, after a violent earthquake which was close to the surface. It struck just before midnight, its epicenter a few miles off the island's east coast. This man says, "I just walked out before the floor collapsed. I didn't see where it fell to. Now there are 3 people inside." The reporter asks him on which floor. He replies, "We were on the 3rd floor. They are fine. They just called me."
We were all in bed and everything just started shaking. The bed started shaking. Everyone kind of started screaming.
One eyewitness described the moment the quake struck. Aftershocks happening even as she was being interviewed.
Oh my God. This is an aftershock. I'm sorry.
With several high-rise buildings badly damaged, many fled to the streets and the parks, away from the scattered debris. Roads have been lifted and split, and a local hospital damaged, with more than 200 people injured. The tremors were felt more than 160 kilometres away. Search teams now using specially trained dogs to try to make sure that no one is left trapped inside. Tens of thousands are now without water after a quake which caused extensive damage across a wide area. The government here says the country has already suffered more than 100 much smaller earthquakes in just the last week alone.
Andrew Plant reporting. The largest tertiary education provider in Taranaki has announced it will not be offering a new suite of art and design courses this year, a decision that's left prospective students fuming. The students say they were not given enough notice of the decision, making it difficult for them to make alternative arrangements. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
In December, the Western Institute of Technology announced it would finish teaching the Level 6 Diploma in Creative Technology this year, but not take new enrolments in the program. Instead, it would offer the New Zealand Diploma in Art and Design and the New Zealand Diploma in Digital Media and Design. Now the institute says demand for the new qualifications is so low they will not be offered in 2018. The timing of the news could not have been more unfortunate for 18-year-old Jess Clough, who was enrolled in the Level 5 Diploma in Digital Media and Design.
On the 24th of January this year, I got a call saying that it's been cancelled and that I was eligible for other Level 5 courses, or I could go to UCOL and see if there was a similar course.
What was significant about that date?
That was my birthday, so it wasn't the greatest news to hear.
Jess says she didn't get noticed soon enough.
No, because my course would have started on the 26th of February, so it wasn't even a month. Well, it was a month away, but to enrol anywhere else and to move away, it's not that much time.
Jess's mum, Rachel Prowse, says her daughter's disappointment was palpable.
It was just tough watching her so disappointed when she got that phone call. She had planned out, she is a planner, so she planned out what she was going to do, where it was going to take her, what she thought she was going to do for the year, down to the last dot and crossing her T's. And then it just shattered her and it's like, what do we do?
Jess has given study away and is now working full-time at McDonald's. And she's not the only one who's had to make new plans. Marina Rousseau was fully paid up for study in 2018 and had heard nothing from WIT ahead of the call on January the 24th. She's been left hanging.
I mean, all the students from New Plymouth or who enrolled, where do we go from here? Apparently we can contact Massey or one of the institutions in Palmerston North. But yeah, I'm not sure what to do now. I don't know where to continue.
The chief executive of WIT, Barbara George, says enrolments for the two courses were in single figures and they were not viable.
That doesn't mean to say that there weren't people out there who were making up their mind or thinking about it or talking to people about it, but we had no applications from them in order to be able to talk to them and encourage them to go through with a full enrolment.
Ms George says the institute did all it could to offer the courses and she feels for the affected students.
We'd been working on this as an institute for some time, but couldn't go public on the final decision until the final decision was made. And the date for that was the 19th of January.
The students told me that they'd been notified on the 24th of January. Do you feel that gives them enough time to make alternative arrangements?
It's unfortunate, but it happens.
Ms George says the courses could run in 2019, but if they don't, it will be the first time in almost 30 years that Polytech would not have an arts program. That's something the acting director of the Lenlai Centre and Gavette Brewster Art Gallery, Colleen Mullen, can't fathom.
It shocks me the short-sightedness of it. The creative industries are big and getting bigger, and they need workers.
Ms Mullen says a big part of the gallery's workforce are WIT graduates. Meanwhile, the Polytech says students affected by the changes, which have cost 2 tutors their jobs, should get in touch so it can help with alternative arrangements. It also points out that web design and computer-aided design are taught in its mechanical engineering and information technology programs. Ina mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martin-Aho.
Lots of people are texting and emailing in to say Falcon Heavy, which is Elon Musk's rocket, is not the heaviest rocket in history. Saturn V, for example, much, much heavier. It is the heaviest rocket. I want to get this right because otherwise more people will text in. It's the heaviest rocket launched today. I'm certain about that. Thank you for your feedback. By golly, the problem with working on national radio is that about 200 of you have PhDs on every subject we're covering. The AIDS Foundation says wider access to a key drug is a game changer that could slash rising HIV infection rates. Drug buyer Pharmac says it will fund the drug Truvada from next month for up to 4,000 people, mainly gay men who are not infected but at high risk of contracting HIV. The Foundation's Executive Director Jason Myers told health correspondent Karen Brown that, if taken daily, Truvada is highly effective at preventing the transmission of HIV.
It has enormous potential to not only halt those rising HIV infection numbers we're seeing, but also seriously drive them down.
You're talking about rising numbers. How many New Zealanders have it and how fast is it rising?
We know that there are around 3,500 people living with HIV in New Zealand, and 2016 saw the highest number of new infections in any year since records began, so that was 244. Men who have sex with men continue to be the group most impacted, so they made up 89% of new infections that were locally inquired in New Zealand. So a significantly disproportionate burden carried by that community.
And up until now, have they been buying this treatment themselves, and if so, you know, at what cost?
That's right. So prior to this announcement, individuals who have wanted to access PrEP have got prescriptions from their general practitioner, and they've been importing generic forms of the drug from overseas at around $50 to $100 a month. If they've wanted the licensed drug, then that would have been costing them around $1,000 a month. So clearly cost prohibitive for the majority of Kiwis.
That's Dr. Jason Myers of the AIDS Foundation speaking there with Karen Brown. Australia's detention system has often been the focus of criticism from human rights activists. Now a new report by Human Rights Watch has uncovered widespread abuse of prisoners with disabilities. The report found that while people with disabilities account for about 18% of the country's population, they make up almost 50% of people entering prisons. Here's the ABC's Norman Hemont.
Life in Australia's prisons is harsh. A new report from Human Rights Watch has found for people with disabilities, it is often filled with neglect and abuse. Kriti Sharma is the report's author.
We found that people with disabilities are particularly at risk of physical and sexual violence from prisoners as well as staff.
Investigators from Human Rights Watch visited 14 prisons in Western Australia and Queensland. They spoke with more than 130 current or recently released prisoners, as well as advocates, prison staff, and mental health professionals. The report found people with disabilities are dramatically overrepresented in Australia's prison system, and those with mental illness and intellectual disabilities, like the former prisoner Will Call Pete, are particularly vulnerable. He entered prison at age 20. He says he was repeatedly abused.
It went from physical to mental to sexual, and that's where I think a lot of my dramas began, because I had my self-esteem kicked out of me, like when I was bashed, and then when I was sexually abused. There has to be more care and more heart.
The report says prisoners with a disability often don't report abuse for fear it will get worse. Human Rights Watch expressed grave concern over what's called the Prisoner Carer Program, where guards appoint other inmates as carers of people with disabilities. One senior nurse in Queensland told investigators that 6 of the 8 current prisoner carers in their facility were convicted sex offenders. Kriti Sharma.
We documented cases where a prisoner carer was routinely raping the person with a disability in his care. And the only reason this abuse even came to light was because the staff found blood and feces on bed sheets during a random cell search.
The report says prisoners with a disability are also overrepresented in solitary confinement units, where they're on their own for 22 hours a day. Human Rights Watch says that practice should end immediately. It also recommends much more training to help staff interact with prisoners with a disability.
That's the ABC's Norman Hemont. It was a clever marketing ploy which has taken on a life of its own during the American Super Bowl, which is the most expensive television advertising airtime anywhere in the world. What popped up was, well, a trailer for a new star-studded Crocodile Dundee movie called Dundee, the Son of a Legend Returns Home. Was it? No, it was actually a publicity stunt for Tourism Australia. Now it's sparked a petition calling for a real Crocodile Dundee sequel. The BBC's Farhana Dawood has this report.
The spoof trailer for Dundee, the Son of a Legend Returns Home was aimed mainly at an American audience around the time of the Super Bowl.
Good day, losers. Yo, where them kangaroos at?
Brian Dundee?
Yep. Really?
The advertisements by the Australian Tourist Board tricked many into thinking a reboot of the famous 1980s film Crocodile Dundee was making an appearance in 2018. The trailers featured Australian stars Margot Robbie, Hugh Jackman, Russell Crowe and American comedian Danny McBride. They've taken social media by storm and racked up hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube.
Wait, hold up. This isn't a movie. No. It's a tourism ad for Australia.
Yes. But listen, you're the best Crocodile Dundee since Crocodile Dundee.
Really?
Yes, really. And we had the best trip ever, didn't we?
It was pretty sweet.
And now there is a petition to make another real Dundee film, perhaps with a twist, an update on the male crocodile wrestling outback hero Mick Dundee.
You ever seen a humpback whale give birth? It's a bloodbath.
There's a suggestion that Margot Robbie could take the lead, challenging the fact that women rarely feature as the lead in Australian outback films. One journalist has even devised a plot.
I don't just own this newspaper, son. I own this country. And Dundee's gonna learn who the most dangerous animal in Australia is. It's me.
With Interpol calling on the glamorous fashionista Margot Robbie to help crack a lucrative black market for crocodile leather, which involves an international crime gang poaching crocodiles in the Australian outback. But for now, a remake is purely fictional, though the trailers are available everywhere on the internet.
Farhana Darwood, the petition on the hashtag #BringBackDundee says, on behalf of Crocodile Dundee lovers around the world, we petition Paul Hogan, who's how old now? How old's Paul Hogan, Pip? And 78, and the actors to create a new instalment of the movie Australia Wants It, the World Wants It. Stop teasing us and make it happen. That is Checkpoint for tonight. Lots of feedback. We really appreciate hearing from you and some fantastic story suggestions which we will follow up on. We are very grateful for them. And we're very grateful for your company, however you are joining us. On behalf of the excellent Checkpoint team, thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ new... Oh, hang on just a sec. This is Trending Now on RNZ National, our feature highlighting the stories you've been sharing via digital and social media. Here's 9 to Noon's Catherine Ryan with the most listened to interview from Mondays.
Our political commentators, Matthew Hooton and Mike Williams, are with us in the Auckland studio. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Right now, RNZ is live streaming events at Waitangi. The New Zealand First MP Shane Jones is speaking as we go to air. This is a very different mood and environment around this particular Waitangi year. It's going to have a record-making speech, an historical first, I think, from a woman Prime Minister very soon. And all this feeds in, Mike, if we look at the politics.